Everyone wants results. Everyone wants strength, freedom, clarity, but very few are willing to endure the one thing that creates all of it: consistency. The quiet, unglamorous grind of showing up, not when it's exciting, not when it's convenient, but when your whole body says, "Not today." And you move anyway. This isn't about motivation, it's about mastery. And the truth is, most people will never taste it because they keep waiting to feel ready instead of forcing themselves to follow through. The Stoics never promised ease. They promised meaning. They believed that a disciplined, consistent life was not only more honorable, but more free. And they understood that the key to strength wasn't found in bursts of inspiration. It was found in rhythm, in structure, in aligning your days with your values, not your moods. Because when you build your life around how you feel, you become a prisoner of your emotions. But when you build your life around what you decide, you become untouchable. This episode is not about pushing yourself once. It's about creating a way of living where discipline is normal, where effort is expected, where you stop asking, "Do I feel like it today?" and start asking, "What needs to be done, no matter what?" That's where real growth begins. Not in the excitement of a new goal, but in the boredom of daily repetition. And here's the paradox. Forcing consistency doesn't make you rigid. It makes you free. It gives you control. It gives you leverage. It makes you the kind of person who doesn't flinch when things get hard, who doesn't disappear when things get boring, who doesn't collapse when no one is watching. Because you don't show up for attention. You show up because it's who you are now. If you've been stuck, scattered, starting over again and again, this is the turning point. Not when you learn something new, but when you become someone new. Someone who doesn't just act consistent, but is consistent. Someone who finishes what they start, who keeps promises, even in private, who doesn't lower the standard just because it's difficult. That kind of power isn't given, it's built daily, through repetition, through structure, through forcing yourself, until one day you no longer have to, you simply are. Consistency is the foundation of everything. If your actions are unpredictable, your life will be too. You can have the best ideas, the clearest goals, the most detailed vision, but if you don't show up consistently, none of it matters. That's the cold truth most people ignore. They chase intensity. They wait for perfect moments. They sprint and crash. But the ones who build anything meaningful, be it strength, peace, wealth, or wisdom, don't operate in bursts. They move like clockwork. They show up, rain or shine, not because it's easy, but because they understand. Consistency is the foundation of everything. You see, most of what you admire in others, the calm under pressure, the discipline, the focus, the control, wasn't built in a single breakthrough moment. It was sculpted slowly, quietly, through hundreds of repetitions. Not when it was fun, but especially when it wasn't. That's what makes consistency so powerful. It transforms effort into identity. At first, you force yourself to act, but over time, those actions start to shape who you are. The Stoics knew this well. They weren't interested in flashes of brilliance. They practiced daily. They trained their minds every morning, not because it was exciting, but because it was essential. Marcus Aurelius didn't write his meditations to impress anyone. He wrote them to anchor himself, every single day, to the discipline of thought. Epictetus reminded his students not to talk about philosophy, but to live it, to practice it, daily. That's consistency, not a performance, but a lifestyle. And here's what most people get wrong. They think consistency means perfection, that if you slip once, the whole structure collapses. That's not true. Consistency isn't about never failing, it's about never quitting. It's about returning to the work again and again, even if yesterday was a mess, even if you broke the streak, even if no one sees it or cares. Because the real strength lies in the return, in the decision to show up, not just once, but always. Think about it. A house isn't built with one brick. A reputation isn't built with one action, and mastery isn't built in one session. It's what you do over time that determines who you become. One workout won't change your body. One journal entry won't clear your mind. One deep conversation won't fix your relationships. But doing the right thing consistently makes everything evolve. But the catch is this: consistency is rarely exciting. That's why most people abandon it. It's not glamorous. It's not full of dopamine. You won't always see the payoff right away. In fact, it may feel like nothing's happening. But it is. You're stacking wins. You're laying bricks. You're building internal momentum, even when it's invisible from the outside. And it's in these quiet days, when progress feels slow, that the decision to stay consistent matters most. Anyone can show up when they're hyped. Anyone can do the right thing when it's new and fresh and loud. But the ones who succeed are the ones who master the silence, who find rhythm in the repetition, who stop needing every action to feel good and start appreciating what it's building. So if your life feels chaotic right now, if you're overwhelmed or scattered or tired of starting over, ask yourself, what would change if I just committed to one thing every day without negotiation? What if I stopped obsessing over speed and focused on rhythm instead? What if I treated consistency not as a burden, but as a privilege? A choice that few make, and even fewer master. Because once consistency becomes your base, everything else stabilizes. Your mood improves. Your confidence grows. Your identity strengthens. You become the kind of person who doesn't have to say, "I'm trying." Because your actions speak so loudly, there's nothing left to prove. This is your foundation, not a sprint, not a hack, not a shortcut, but a daily standard. Quiet, strong, and unshakable. Motivation is overrated. Motivation feels good. That's why we crave it. It's the high before the hard work, that sudden burning sensation in your chest that says, "Today I'll change everything." But here's the problem: it never lasts. You feel inspired for an hour, maybe a day, maybe even a week. Then it fades. Life interrupts. Pressure builds. Resistance shows up. And the truth you don't want to admit hits you. You don't feel like it anymore. That's when most people stop. They misread the dip in motivation as a sign that they're doing something wrong, that maybe they weren't meant for this path, that maybe the timing is off, the goal too big, the dream too unrealistic. But the ones who actually build something, who master their mind, their craft, their life, don't make that mistake. Because they stopped believing that motivation is reliable. They stopped expecting it to carry them. Instead, they replace it with something far more powerful: discipline. Stoic philosophy doesn't waste time on the question, "How do I feel about this?" The Stoic doesn't ask, "Am I in the mood today?" He asks one thing: "Is this the right thing to do?" And if the answer is yes, he does it. Tired, angry, uninspired, uncertain, it doesn't matter. Because for the Stoic, action comes before emotion. And through action, clarity is born. This mindset is what separates the temporary achiever from the relentless builder. The man who depends on motivation will always be inconsistent. He's productive when life feels light. He trains when he's excited. He studies when it's convenient. But when the weight comes, when emotion turns, when the dopamine dips, he stops. He tells himself he's burned out, that he needs a break, that life got too busy. But the truth is simpler. He didn't build a system that survives his moods, and that's what you need. A system, not a spark. A rhythm that runs even when your feelings don't cooperate. That's why the Stoics practiced daily rituals. Marcus Aurelius didn't wait for inspiration to write. He wrote as a discipline, as a way to hold his mind to account. Epictetus told his students not to speak about philosophy, but to live it. That means doing the hard thing, the disciplined thing, especially when it's uncomfortable. Because let's be honest, how many things in your life do you know you need to do, but delay simply because you're not feeling it? How many workouts missed? How many journal entries never written? How many conversations avoided? How many dreams postponed because the emotional wave didn't arrive on time? If you wait to feel like doing the work, you've already lost the battle. Because motivation is a luxury. It's great when it shows up, but deadly when it becomes a requirement. The ones who rise above don't wait for it. They've trained their identity to act regardless. They don't chase a mood. They honor a standard. And here's the irony. When you stop needing motivation, you begin to feel it more often, because you're no longer paralyzed by the lack of it. You've built a rhythm, a momentum. You've proven to yourself over and over that you can move without being pushed. That builds confidence, not the fake kind, not the Instagram quote kind, but the real kind, the one that's earned through effort, through quiet, invisible repetitions, through doing the thing day after day, especially when no one is watching and nothing exciting is happening. Motivation is emotion. Discipline is identity, and identity always wins. The Stoics would say, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. That means don't talk about consistency, live it. Don't wait to feel productive, design your day so you must be productive. Don't wish for the will to act. Structure your life so action becomes default. This is why military leaders, elite athletes, and master craftsmen all rely on routine, not hype. They don't wait for lightning, they create the storm, through discipline, through ritual, through non-negotiable standards. So how do you build this in yourself? You stop romanticizing effort. You stop chasing the perfect mood. You begin every day not with a question of how you feel, but a reminder of what you committed to. You identify your essentials: movement, reflection, deep work. You design your environment so those things happen by default. You wake up and do what must be done, because that's who you are now. Some days will feel powerful, others will feel numb. Doesn't matter. You act anyway, because action creates energy. Action leads to clarity, and action, repeated relentlessly, is what makes you unstoppable. So ask yourself, who are you when the spark is gone? Who are you on the mornings when nothing feels inspiring? That's the man the world will meet. That's the man your future depends on. Because motivation may start the fire, but only discipline keeps it burning. Start with one simple habit. If you want to change your life, don't start by trying to change everything. That's the mistake most people make. They write long lists, make elaborate plans, download fancy apps, and within days they're exhausted. Not because they're incapable, but because they tried to rebuild an entire identity overnight. But real transformation doesn't begin with overhauling your life. It begins with one thing, one habit, simple, clear, non-negotiable, and repeat it until it becomes part of you. That's the first discipline, learning to start small and stay consistent. The Stoics understood this deeply. They didn't believe in overwhelming the soul with ambition. They believed in steady refinement. Epictetus reminded his students, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid with regard to external things." That means ignore the noise, the opinions, the pressure to look impressive. Instead, choose a single behavior that aligns with the person you want to become and master it. Maybe that habit is waking up early, not for productivity hype, but for clarity. Maybe it's writing a single page each day to sharpen your thoughts. Maybe it's doing 20 push-ups just to remind your body that you're not weak. It's not the intensity that matters, it's the symbolism. That one action becomes your anchor, your proof, your reminder that you're no longer operating on default. And once that habit becomes part of your identity, everything else gets easier, because success compounds, confidence compounds. You don't need motivation when your system is running. You don't have to ask, "Should I do this today?" It's already part of you. Let's be honest. Most people don't struggle because they lack knowledge. They struggle because they lack follow-through. They know what to do, but they try to do too much, too soon. They don't realize that discipline isn't born from big commitments. It's born from kept promises, even tiny ones. When you commit to one habit and you stick to it through distraction, fatigue, and doubt, you start to build something more valuable than success. You build trust in yourself. That trust is everything, because the next time you say, "I'm going to do this," you believe it, and that belief changes your posture, your speech, your decisions. You're no longer hoping you'll be consistent. You know you will be. And it all started with one simple act. But don't confuse simple with easy. The habit you choose must feel real. It must carry weight, not in complexity, but in meaning. It must represent a shift, a new standard, a rejection of your old excuses. You're not just meditating for 5 minutes. You're becoming someone who prioritizes mental clarity. You're not just reading 10 pages. You're becoming someone who feeds the mind daily. You're not just turning your phone off for an hour. You're reclaiming your attention. This is identity work, and identity is sticky. The more you reinforce it, the harder it becomes to break. But the opposite is also true. If you abandon your habit at the first sign of difficulty, you reinforce a different identity. The one that says, "I don't finish what I start." And every time you repeat that message, it gets harder to change. So start with one habit, not 10, not 5, just one. Make it small enough that you can guarantee success, but meaningful enough that you feel it shift something inside you. Track it, honor it, defend it like it matters, because it does. It's your entry point, your proof, your new foundation. You don't need to tell the world. Don't post it. Don't ask for validation. Let it be quiet. Let it be yours. Because the strongest habits aren't built in public. They're built in private, in the silence between who you've been and who you're becoming. And the beauty is this: once that habit is locked in, your mind starts asking what else you're capable of. You begin to crave alignment. You start adjusting your environment, your choices, your time. You build a rhythm. And before you know it, you're no longer forcing consistency. It's living through you. So ask yourself, what's one habit that, if done daily, would anchor you to the man you want to become? Don't wait for the perfect one. Pick it. Start it. Today. Let it be small. Let it be silent. Let it be sacred. Because from that one seed, discipline grows. Discipline starts in the mind. Before it shows up in your schedule, before it becomes visible in your habits, your body, your work ethic, discipline begins in the most overlooked place, your thinking. The mind is where every act of self-control is born or lost. You don't miss workouts because your body failed. You don't break habits because your hands slipped. It starts earlier, with a single thought, a justification, a whisper that says, you can skip it this once. And if you believe it, if you let that thought take root, the rest follows like dominoes. That's why if you want to become consistent, you have to train your mind like a soldier trains for battle. You have to study the way it moves under pressure. You have to listen for the lies it tells you when things get uncomfortable. The Stoics understood this well. They didn't just talk about logic and virtue for intellectual fun. They used philosophy as armor. Epictetus wrote, "If you want to be free, begin by understanding the nature of your mind." That's where freedom and discipline starts. Most people never do this work. They try to install routines, track habits, even mimic successful people, but they never examine the internal software. They don't question the excuses. They don't interrupt the thought patterns. So they stay stuck. Because you can't fix an inconsistent life with an untrained mind. Your thoughts are the first battlefield. You win or lose there long before action begins. And that means you need to become ruthless with your inner dialogue. You have to start catching the patterns that pull you off course. The subtle rationalizations. I've earned a break. I'll make up for it tomorrow. I'm just not feeling it today. These sound harmless. They sound reasonable. But they are termites, quietly eating away at your structure. This is why the mind must be trained before the body, before the to-do list, before the world wakes up. Because if your first thoughts of the day are reactive, scattered, weak, you've already given the day away. But if your thoughts are structured, anchored in reason, purpose, and clarity, then the rest of the day becomes a series of choices you're already prepared to face. Think about how powerful that is, to wake up and already know that no matter what happens, whether you're tired, angry, anxious, overwhelmed, you will still act in alignment with your highest standard. That kind of certainty isn't born from motivation. It's born from mental training, from daily practice, from thought discipline. That's why journaling, silence, and reflection matter. They're not aesthetic, they're strategic. When you write your thoughts, you reveal your mind's patterns. When you sit in silence, you hear the noise that usually drives your decisions. When you reflect with honesty, you begin to separate truth from temptation. The Stoics called this prosos, attention, watchfulness, being aware of your inner landscape moment by moment. That doesn't mean you suppress every emotion. It means you recognize what arises and choose your response. That is the very definition of self-mastery. Discipline starts in the gap between thought and action. In that microsecond when the thought appears, I'm tired, I don't want to do this, I deserve a break, and you decide, do I follow this or do I lead myself anyway? That decision, repeated 100 times a day, is what shapes who you become. So how do you strengthen that mental muscle? Start by building a system for catching weak thoughts. Write them down. Challenge them. Ask, is this thought helping me become who I want to be? Or is it just a clever excuse in disguise? Most people never do this because it requires slowing down. But if you never slow your thinking, you'll always live at the mercy of your impulses. Then replace those weak thoughts with commands. Clear, strong instructions from your higher self. Not vague hopes. Not passive affirmations. but active, grounded statements. We move anyway. This is what we do. Discomfort is not a reason to stop. You don't ask your mind for permission. You lead it. Over time, the mental resistance doesn't disappear, but it becomes irrelevant. You stop needing to argue with yourself. You stop getting dragged into inner debates. You simply act, and the more you act, the quieter the noise becomes. This is discipline at its core, not willpower in bursts, but trained thought in motion, a mind that serves you, not one that tricks you, a mind that pushes you forward, even when every part of you wants to coast. So ask yourself, what's the voice in your head saying when things get uncomfortable? Who trained that voice? And what would happen if, starting today, you started training it yourself? Because until your mind submits to your reason, your body, your habits, your results never will. Track everything you do. What you don't measure, you can't control, and what you refuse to track will quietly own you. That's the unspoken rule of life. Without awareness, there is no change. Most people don't fail because they lack discipline. They fail because they lack visibility. They walk through their days blind to their patterns, unaware of how often they slip, how frequently they distract themselves, how little of their time actually goes to what matters. And when they look up weeks later and wonder why nothing has changed, they blame motivation, bad luck, or timing. But the truth is simple. They weren't tracking anything, and that means they were building nothing. The Stoics would call this neglect of the self. They believed that the examined life was the only life worth living, not because of vanity, but because of responsibility. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. But how would you know unless you track what's real? How would you challenge a belief or correct a habit or notice your own improvement unless you see it written clearly in front of you?" This is where tracking becomes more than a productivity tool. It becomes a mirror, a way to observe your mind, your decisions, your use of time with brutal honesty. Not for punishment, but for awareness. Because when you track your behavior, you begin to see what's really happening behind the scenes of your life. The micro choices, the missed opportunities, the progress that felt invisible but was there all along. Let's be practical. Imagine waking up and logging every hour of your day, not obsessively but consciously. You'd start noticing patterns, where your energy dips, when your mind wanders, how often you check your phone, which tasks drain you and which ones build momentum. You'd begin to spot where your time goes and where your excuses hide. And in that visibility, you gain leverage. Because here's what most people do. They start with intensity. They say, I'm going to meditate, journal, work out, read and build a business all before noon. And when they don't track any of it, they fall short and assume they failed. But they didn't fail. They were just unaware. Maybe they got 70% right. Maybe they improved in areas they didn't even realize. But without a record, their progress becomes invisible, and invisible progress is easy to abandon. This is why small, consistent tracking is powerful. You don't need to document every detail of your life, but you do need to create systems that tell the truth. A habit tracker, a journal prompt, a weekly review, something that forces you to pause and ask, what did I actually do this week? Not what did I intend, not what did I think, what did I do? And here's the paradox. Tracking may seem rigid at first, but it leads to more freedom. When you know where your time goes, you stop guessing. You stop saying, I don't know where the day went. You stop living reactively. You start taking control. You start saying, these 3 hours are mine. This pattern needs to go. This habit is working. I'll double down. You also learn to measure what matters, not just hours worked or calories burned, but states of mind, emotional patterns, what triggers your laziness, what rituals center you. You begin to understand yourself, not as a mystery, but as a system that can be studied, adjusted, improved. This is the heart of Stoic practice, self-awareness, grounded in observation, not endless introspection, not overthinking, but clear, focused reflection. You can't become what you want to be unless you know who you are today. And tracking gives you that starting point. So if you find yourself inconsistent, stuck, or unsure why you're not progressing, don't try harder. Look closer, write it down, see it plainly, and ask yourself, what am I really doing with my days? That question alone, asked honestly, will reveal more than a dozen motivational quotes ever could. And when the answer makes you uncomfortable, good. That means you're waking up. That means the real work can begin. Because clarity kills excuses, and once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. So start tracking, not to impress anyone, not to be perfect, but to become someone who lives on purpose, every hour, every day, every decision. Don't rely on feeling like it. If you only act when you feel like it, you'll rarely act at all. That's the trap. We wait for alignment, for motivation, for that perfect wave of emotion to carry us into motion. But consistency doesn't work like that. Discipline doesn't wait for your mood to cooperate, and success, in any meaningful form, doesn't care how you feel. It only responds to what you do. Here's the hard truth. You won't always feel like waking up early. You won't feel like journaling or working out, or focusing when your mind is scattered. You won't feel like resisting temptation or choosing the harder, but better option. And that's exactly the moment when your true character reveals itself. Not when things are easy, but when they're inconvenient, when they're boring, when they're uncomfortable. That's where real consistency is born. The Stoics never glorified emotion. They respected it, but they never let it rule them. They saw feelings as weather, always shifting, always unpredictable, always temporary. You don't plan your life around the weather. You plan around your principles. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That includes the event of emotion. Your mood is not your master. It's something to observe, not obey. Most people live backwards. They think action comes after emotion, that you work when you're inspired, that you create when you feel passionate, that you train when you feel strong. But the Stoic lives forward. He acts first and lets the emotion follow. You don't wait to feel disciplined. You behave with discipline, and that behavior shapes your identity. You don't wait to feel motivated. You move, and through movement, you create momentum. You don't wait for confidence. You keep your promises, and confidence grows from within. But how many times have you let "I don't feel like it" dictate your decisions? You said you'd start the habit. You said you'd show up. But then came the low-energy day, the restless night, the voice that whispered, "Skip it. No big deal." And maybe you listened. And maybe one day became 3, became 7, became guilt. And you called it burnout. But what if it was just the habit of hesitating? This is where people lose their edge. Not in big failures, but in tiny moments of surrender. Tiny choices repeated often enough to rewrite who they think they are. And the scariest part, it's subtle. No one else notices when you skip your practice, when you break the routine, when you cheat your own standard. But you notice, and over time, that erodes your trust in yourself. And nothing weakens consistency like a mind that no longer believes its own promises. That's why the practice of forcing action, especially when you don't feel like it, is sacred. It's how you reclaim authority over your own life. You feel tired, but you train. You feel foggy, but you write. You feel overwhelmed, but you start. You stop negotiating. You stop debating. You stop asking your mood for permission. And over time, something powerful happens. The mind adapts. It starts to understand that feeling is not a prerequisite for effort, that you're not someone who depends on the right energy or the right time. You are someone who acts from clarity, from identity, from internal leadership. This doesn't mean ignoring your body or pushing yourself into burnout. It means knowing the difference between real exhaustion and manufactured resistance. Most of the time, we don't need rest. We need direction. We don't need to slow down. We need to begin. The Stoics taught that the path to virtue is through habit, and habit is built through repetition, not convenience. They didn't wait for their emotions to align with their values. They trained themselves until action became instinct. Until the right thing was no longer a debate. It was default. So what does this mean for you? It means every time you don't feel like doing the thing, that's exactly when you must. Not to prove anything to the world, but to prove something to yourself. That you are not your emotion, that your commitment means more than your mood, that your standard is stronger than your excuse. This is how consistent people are built, not through motivation, not through perfect circumstances, but through repetition in the face of resistance, through action in the absence of feeling. So ask yourself, how often are you waiting to feel ready before you move? And what would your life look like if you stopped waiting and just started? Because the man who builds himself on action, not emotion, is the man who doesn't just dream of change, he becomes it. Design your environment for success. You can have all the discipline in the world, but if your environment is working against you, you'll lose. Not because you're weak, but because your surroundings are stronger than you think. Willpower fades, motivation disappears, but your environment is always speaking to you, shaping your choices, triggering your habits, guiding your behavior. And if you don't design it with intention, it will design you by default. The Stoics believed that virtue doesn't live in isolation. It must be lived in the real world, in your actions, your routines, your choices. And the world you move through each day plays a silent but powerful role in those choices. That's why they were obsessed with awareness, awareness of who they spent time with, awareness of what they consumed, awareness of where they allowed their attention to live. Because they knew whatever surrounds you slowly becomes you. Look around your space. Not just physically, but digitally, emotionally, socially. What are you allowing into your field of vision every day? What's on your desk, on your screen, in your ears, on your schedule? Most people live in environments designed for distraction. Notifications, noise, clutter, temptation, all within arm's reach. And then they wonder why focus is rare, why discipline fades, why they can't stay consistent. But the answer is right in front of them. The environment isn't built for success. It's built for escape. That's why one of the most radical acts of discipline is redesigning your space. Not to look productive, but to be productive. Not to look aesthetic, but to be aligned. You don't need a perfect setup. You need a setup that makes your desired actions easier and your worst temptations harder. Start simple. Remove friction from the good habits. Put your journal where you'll see it. Lay out your workout clothes the night before. Keep your phone out of the room when you work. Delete the apps that steal your attention. Place your goals where you can read them daily. Not hidden in a notebook, but visible. Because visual reminders shape mental behavior. What you see often, you start to believe. And what you believe, you start to embody. Now, reverse it. Add friction to the bad habits. If junk food is in your house, you will eat it. If the phone is next to your bed, you will scroll. If the TV remote is easy to grab, you will waste hours. That doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. And humans respond to ease. So make the wrong things harder to reach, harder to justify, harder to stumble into mindlessly. The same rule applies to people. Your social environment is more powerful than you realize. If you spend time around the lazy, you will relax your standards. If you're surrounded by complainers, you'll start to speak like a victim. If you're always hearing excuses, you'll believe they're acceptable. That's not judgment, that's psychology. We adapt to survive, and we mimic to belong. But the Stoic doesn't adapt to weakness. He protects his energy. He chooses his company. He understands that proximity is influence, and influence is destiny. This is why designing your environment isn't just about minimalism or organization. It's about guarding your future. It's about setting up your life so that your highest self has the advantage, not your lowest impulse. It's about making the right thing easier to choose over and over until it becomes second nature. And here's the deeper truth. Your environment is not just what's around you. It's also what's within you. Your mental environment, your internal narrative. If your mind is filled with chaos, with self-criticism, with distraction, then no amount of external structure will save you. You must clear space inside too. This is where meditation, silence, reflection come in. They aren't luxuries, they are design choices for the soul. A quiet mind becomes a sharp mind, and a sharp mind executes. Think of it like this. Would you try to run a marathon through a construction zone? Of course not. But most people try to chase greatness in the middle of digital clutter, emotional noise, and physical chaos. They try to stay disciplined while their environment constantly pulls them toward weakness. It doesn't work. You can't out-hustle your surroundings forever. Eventually, the space you live in will shape your habits or sabotage them. So ask yourself, what does my environment say about what I value? What does it reward? What does it reinforce? And what small changes could I make today to make the right choice the easy one? Because consistency isn't about superhuman effort. It's about designing your world so the best version of you becomes inevitable. And that kind of design, that quiet, intentional architecture, is the true foundation of self-mastery. Embrace boredom. It's part of mastery. Most people quit, not because it's too hard, but because it's too boring. That's the silent killer of consistency. Not pain, not failure, not even exhaustion. Just the dull, slow repetition of showing up day after day, doing the same thing, with no applause, no adrenaline, and no instant reward. And yet, this is exactly where greatness is born. In the boredom, in the stillness, in the routine. We've been trained to crave novelty, new apps, new goals, new workouts, new relationships. If something feels stale, we assume it's wrong. We look for the next spark, the next peak experience. But mastery doesn't live in the spark. It lives in the grind. The Stoics knew this well. They didn't chase excitement. They chased excellence. And they understood that excellence isn't exciting most of the time. It's quiet, repetitive, even tedious. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You must build up your life action by action and be content if each one achieves its goal." Notice the word content, not thrilled, not entertained. Content, because contentment is what allows you to persist. To keep writing when the ideas feel stale. To keep training when your body feels slow. To keep waking up early, even when the thrill of self-improvement has worn off. That's the secret no one talks about. Boredom isn't a signal to stop. It's a signal to go deeper. When you first begin anything, learning a skill, building a habit, pursuing a goal, it feels fresh. Your brain is lit up. Your emotions are high. But that feeling fades. It always does. What's left afterward is rhythm, structure, discipline. And if you haven't learned to make peace with boredom, you'll walk away from the very thing that's shaping you. Boredom is not the enemy. It's the gateway. If you can stay with it, if you can keep practicing, keep refining, keep showing up long after the novelty is gone, you'll enter a level of depth most people never reach. Because most people hit the wall and turn around. They say, "This doesn't feel right anymore." But the Stoic says, "This is the work. This is the path. This is where mastery begins." Let's make this real. A writer who only writes when inspired will finish nothing. A martial artist who only trains when it's fun will never earn the black belt. An entrepreneur who jumps from idea to idea will never build anything lasting. The difference between amateur and master isn't talent. It's the willingness to endure the dull. The Stoics didn't just accept repetition, they leaned into it. They journaled daily, reflected daily, trained their minds daily, not because they loved every moment of it, but because they knew, without repetition, there is no growth. Without structure, there is no strength. Without boredom, there is no breakthrough. Here's the irony. The more you resist boredom, the more distracted you become. You jump from task to task. You chase stimulation. You start things, but rarely finish. And with every restart, you lose momentum. You stay in a constant cycle of novelty addiction. But the person who embraces boredom, he gains focus. He becomes mentally tougher. He builds internal resistance to the modern disease of overstimulation. In fact, boredom becomes a kind of training, a test of your relationship with your work. Can you stay with something when the feeling is gone? Can you still execute your routine with presence, even when no part of it feels exciting? Because, if you can, you've crossed a threshold most people never even approach. That's why monks repeat the same prayers, why artists practice the same strokes, why Stoics revisit the same teachings over and over. Not because they haven't moved on, but because they've understood. Repetition refines the soul. It polishes the edge. It strips away the ego that always wants something new, something louder, something faster. So how do you train yourself to embrace boredom? You begin by noticing your impulse to escape. When you sit down to work and the urge to check your phone arises, pause. When the workout gets repetitive, observe it. When the discipline starts to feel dull, lean in. Say to yourself, "This is where most people stop. This is where I go further." That mindset shift is powerful, because now boredom isn't a wall, it's a doorway. You also give boredom meaning. You remind yourself that behind the repetition, something sacred is forming. A reputation, a character, a mind that doesn't need to be entertained to stay focused. That kind of mind is rare, and therefore unshakable. So ask yourself, where in your life have you been quitting, not because it was hard, but because it wasn't exciting anymore? And what would happen if, just for the next 30 days, you chose to stay? with your routine, with your craft, with your process, no matter how ordinary it feels. Because in that choice, you begin to separate yourself from the impatient, from the distracted, from the undisciplined. You become the kind of person who finishes, who masters, who doesn't need thrill because he's found something better: purpose. Create non-negotiables. The fastest way to collapse your progress is to keep everything optional, to live by how you feel, what you have time for, or whether or not the day is going your way. When your habits are negotiable, your identity is unstable. You'll drift, you'll hesitate, you'll rationalize. And the worst part, you won't even notice the decline until it becomes normal. That's why the people who rise above, the ones who become steady, calm, consistent, they live by a different code. They create non-negotiables. A non-negotiable is not a goal. It's not a wish list item. It's not a resolution you hope to keep. It's a personal law. A standard so strong that emotion doesn't touch it. Excuses don't shake it. It's what you do, no matter what. The Stoics called this internal sovereignty, the ability to live in agreement with nature, your nature, not the noise of the world, not the moods of the day, but a quiet, deliberate alignment with what you know to be true. Marcus Aurelius didn't say, "Try to do your duty when you can." He said, "Just that you do the right thing. The rest doesn't matter." That's a non-negotiable mindset, clear, grounded, immovable. In a modern world filled with flexibility, distractions, and endless options, the disciplined man creates rules, not to feel restricted, but to feel free. Because when something is non-negotiable, it no longer drains your mental energy. You don't wake up and ask, "Should I work out today?" You don't debate whether to meditate, to write, to reflect, to protect your peace. The decision is already made, and that clarity becomes power. The most consistent people don't have more motivation, they have more structure. Their life is designed around standards, not feelings, and those standards act like rails on a track. Even when their energy is low, even when chaos surrounds them, the train keeps moving forward. But how do you create non-negotiables that actually work? You start small. You choose what matters most. Not 10 things, 1 or 2. What's the anchor of your day? What's the one habit that, if done daily, changes your entire energy? It could be waking up without hitting snooze, writing 1 page, moving your body, saying no to distraction for the first 2 hours. Whatever it is, make it clear and make it absolute. Then define the boundary. What does non-negotiable actually mean? It means even when you're tired, even when you're busy, even when you don't see results yet, even when no one will notice if you skip, even when it feels pointless. That's when the rule matters most, because it's in those moments of friction that your identity is being tested and solidified. Now, be warned, your mind will rebel. It will say, "Just this once. Today doesn't count. You've earned a break." And that's the test. Will you listen to the temporary voice, or will you obey the standard you set when you were clear, calm, and committed? The answer to that question, repeated daily, is the difference between becoming strong or staying scattered. This is not about being rigid or robotic. Life happens. You may travel, you may fall sick, you may have emergencies, but even then, the mindset remains. If I can't do everything, I'll still do something. If you can't do the full workout, do 10 push-ups. If you can't write a full page, write a paragraph. You don't break the chain. You don't let the standard collapse, Because if your identity as a disciplined person is real, it shows up even in disruption. Here's the deeper truth. Your non-negotiables aren't about habits. They're about who you are. They are a mirror for your integrity, your follow-through, your character. Every time you honor them, you reinforce the belief that you are someone who does what he says. And that belief is priceless. It creates confidence, not from hype, but from evidence. And when others ask you, how do you stay so consistent? You won't say, I'm always motivated. You'll say, I've made the decision already. I don't argue with it anymore. That kind of clarity creates momentum. That kind of structure creates freedom. So ask yourself, what are the top 2 or 3 habits that align with your highest self? And are they still optional in your life? If they are, start today. Draw the line, make the rule, set the standard. Not because you want to restrict your freedom, but because you're ready to own it. Because when the important things become non-negotiable, the rest of your life becomes unshakable. Your standards will save you. When things fall apart, when the pressure rises, when plans fail, when emotions cloud your vision, what saves you is not luck, talent, or timing. It's your standards, the invisible lines you've drawn, the quiet rules you live by, the non-negotiable expectations you've set for yourself long before the storm arrived. When everything around you feels uncertain, your standards become your anchor, your protection, your compass. Most people don't realize this. They think their success will come from big breakthroughs, from finding the right strategy or waiting for the right moment. But what truly shapes a life isn't occasional brilliance, it's consistent standards. You don't fall to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And your systems are built on what you tolerate, what you accept, what you allow yourself to become, especially when no one's watching. The Stoics knew this better than anyone. Marcus Aurelius didn't write his meditations to impress the world. He wrote them to remind himself of the man he refused to stop becoming. His standard was virtue, reason, integrity. And when the weight of the empire was on his shoulders, when betrayal, loss, and war surrounded him, he didn't abandon those standards. He returned to them, because they were the only thing he could truly control. What are your standards? When your energy is low, do you still move with discipline, or do you give in to excuses? When someone disrespects you, do you meet it with composure, or do you react with impulse? When life becomes loud and messy, do you rise above, or do you let chaos pull you down? You can't expect to make strong decisions in weak moments unless you've already decided who you are. This is why setting clear personal standards isn't optional, it's survival. If your boundaries are vague, if your values are flexible, if your rules bend whenever pressure comes, you'll spend your life being shaped by the world instead of shaping it. You'll become reactive, drifting, at the mercy of circumstance. But when you raise your standards, quietly, without announcement, you begin to transform. You eat differently, think differently, work differently, speak differently. Not because someone told you to, not because you're chasing approval, but because your internal code requires it. It becomes painful to live below your new level, not in a prideful way, but in a soul-deep way, because once you've tasted alignment, anything less feels like betrayal. And here's the beauty. Your standards don't need to be loud. They don't need to be explained. In fact, the more real they are, the less you feel the need to talk about them. You don't have to justify why you wake up early, why you say no to certain people, why you train every day, why you protect your peace. You just do. That quiet consistency speaks louder than any explanation. But be warned, when you raise your standards, some people will feel uncomfortable. They'll say you've changed, that you're too rigid, too serious. Let them. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. Your alignment is. Your peace is. Your future is. You are not obligated to lower your standards to meet someone else's expectations. If they feel left behind, they can choose to rise. If not, they were never meant to walk your path anyway. Because your standards aren't just for success, they're for protection. They're what keep you from collapsing when life tests you. They're what keep you from betraying yourself when temptation calls. They're what remind you of who you are when the world tries to make you forget. This is why the best time to define your standards is before you need them. Not in crisis, not in chaos, but in clarity. When you're calm, when you can see clearly. That's when you decide, this is what I accept. This is what I reject. This is who I am becoming, and I will not break this code for anyone or anything. So ask yourself honestly, what are the standards you claim to have, and are you truly living by them, or only when it's easy? Are they firm, or do they collapse the moment discomfort shows up? Because in the end, it won't be your goals that save you. It won't be your intentions. It will be the daily standards you refuse to compromise, even when no one else believed in them, even when it felt like nothing was working. That's what makes you unshakable. That's what builds legacy. That's what defines a Stoic. Not perfection, but principle. And when everything else fades, your mood, your motivation, your momentum, your standards will still be there, holding the line, keeping you grounded, guiding you home. Fail small, not big. Failure is not the enemy. In fact, if you're pursuing anything worthwhile, any goal that demands consistency, discipline, or depth, you will fail. That's a given. But what matters most is not whether you fail. It's how you fail. Most people fear failure because they let it grow unchecked. They ignore the early signs. They skip the small things. And then one day, everything breaks. Not from a single decision, but from 1,000 little ones they didn't pay attention to. This is where the disciplined mind differs. It doesn't seek perfection. It doesn't obsess over avoiding every mistake. But it does understand the value of failing small, of catching breakdowns early, of paying attention to the details that over time become destiny. The Stoics taught this with fierce clarity. Seneca warned, "It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that they are difficult." This applies to failure too. When you don't dare to face the small problems head-on, they grow into crises. When you avoid feedback, avoid effort, avoid honesty, you're not protecting yourself. You're planting the seeds of collapse. Failing small means being self-aware enough to notice when you're slipping. It means catching a lazy thought before it becomes a lazy day. It means missing one workout and getting back on track immediately, before it becomes a month of excuses. It means falling off course and correcting, not disappearing. That's the difference. The undisciplined fail big because they pretend the small failures don't matter. The disciplined fail small because they're paying attention. Let's bring this into the real world. Imagine a man building a fortress. Every brick matters. If he ignores one weak corner, a small crack, a slightly unstable foundation, it won't show right away. But one day, under pressure, that's where the collapse begins. Not from the big attack, but from the small oversight. That's how most people break their habits. They don't just wake up one day and quit. They miss a few days. They stop tracking. They stop caring as much. They get a little sloppy. And by the time they realize how far they've drifted, it's already overwhelming. The comeback feels too hard, so they don't return. But when you build a mindset around small accountability, everything changes. You don't beat yourself up when you fall short. You notice, you reflect, you ask, what caused this? What needs to change? You stop the downward spiral before it gains speed. And in doing so, you protect your consistency, not by force, but by foresight. This requires humility. The ego wants to ignore the cracks. It wants to say, "I've got this," even when you don't. But the Stoic doesn't operate from ego. He operates from awareness, from truth. He'd rather face the discomfort of a small correction than the devastation of a full collapse. That's wisdom in motion. And here's the hidden beauty. When you fail small and correct quickly, you build resilience. You learn to recover faster. You train yourself to bounce back, not in weeks, but in hours. That's real strength. Not the ability to avoid mistakes, but the ability to respond to them without drama, without collapse, without quitting. So how do you build this into your life? You track, you reflect, you run weekly audits, not to punish yourself, but to stay aligned. You look at your habits and ask, where am I drifting? What promises did I break this week? What part of me got sloppy, and why? And then you make the fix. Small, clear, decisive. You also adopt the principle of minimum viable success, meaning, even on your worst day, you don't do nothing. You scale down, but you still show up. You don't write a full page. You write a sentence. You don't do a full workout. You do 10 push-ups. This keeps your identity intact, because the moment you let yourself completely break the pattern, that's when the spiral begins. The Stoics trained daily not just for virtue, but for resilience. Because they knew life would test them, they prepared for it, not with hopes, but with structure, not with emotional intensity, but with rational clarity. They understood, it's not the fall that defines you, it's the response. So ask yourself, what are the small cracks in your system right now? What small failures are you ignoring? Where are you waiting for a breakdown instead of correcting in real time? Because you don't need to be perfect, but you do need to be attentive. Fail small, correct fast, protect your rhythm. That's how the strong stay standing. Keep showing up, especially when it's hard. There will be days when nothing makes sense, when the vision blurs, the energy fades, and the progress feels invisible. You'll question everything, your path, your strength, your worth. And in those moments, you'll be tempted to pause, to postpone, to disappear. You'll tell yourself, I'll return when I feel better, when I'm more focused, when life calms down. But that's not how greatness is built. That's not how discipline becomes identity. That's not how a man becomes unshakable. The real growth happens when you show up, especially when it's hard. Anyone can be consistent when the wind is at their back. When the morning feels light, the coffee hits just right, and the world seems to align with your plans. But those moments are rare. The real test, the one that reveals what you're actually made of, comes when the inner resistance is loud, when the body aches, the mind wanders, and the heart feels distant. That's when most people vanish. But the Stoic, he tightens his grip and moves forward anyway. Epictetus reminded us, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. In modern terms, if you want to grow, be ready to look inconsistent to the outside world. Be ready to act when you're not in the mood. Be ready to keep going when no one claps, when no one understands, when even you question why you started. Because it's not applause that makes you consistent. It's your ability to keep showing up when the reward is delayed and the difficulty is real. There's something sacred about the man who shows up regardless, who trains in silence, who creates when he doesn't feel creative, who practices when he doesn't feel passionate, who does the right thing, not because it's glamorous, but because it's necessary. That's what separates a hobbyist from a craftsman, a wanderer from a builder, a man of emotion from a man of principle. And make no mistake, this isn't about suppressing how you feel. It's about choosing your response. You can acknowledge the heaviness, the doubt, the fatigue, and still refuse to let it define your behavior. That's what Stoicism teaches. You are not what you feel. You are what you do in response to what you feel. And every time you move through the difficulty instead of around it, you reinforce a truth that becomes your foundation. I am stronger than my circumstance. Let's be honest. The hardest days aren't the ones where life explodes. They're the ones that feel empty, ordinary, repetitive. The ones where it seems like all your effort is going unnoticed, where your habits feel pointless, where your goals feel far, where your discipline feels like a burden instead of a virtue. These are the days consistency is built, not through intensity, but through presence. Because when you keep showing up on those days, something profound happens. You stop performing for results. You stop living for validation. You begin to act from conviction, from alignment. You're no longer a man who works when the stars align. You're a man who works because this is who he is now. You build a reputation with yourself. That's what matters most, not how others see you, not how the scoreboard looks today, but how you see yourself when you lie down at night. Did you move, even when you wanted to stay still? Did you honor your standard, even when no one else would have blamed you for slacking? Did you choose principle over comfort? That's consistency, not perfection, but commitment, not motivation, but mission, not feeling, but force. And over time, it builds something no one can take from you. Trust. Trust in your word. Trust in your system. Trust in your path, even when the outcome is still unseen. And this is why the final and most powerful principle of consistency is this: show up especially when it's hard. Not because it will always feel good, not because it will always look impressive, but because those are the moments that build the edge, that sculpt the inner steel, that teach your mind and body to obey your will, not your mood. So if today is hard, good. That means it's training day. That means this is a rep for your identity. That means this is one more proof to yourself that you're not the same man you used to be. Because ordinary men wait for life to become easier, but disciplined men become stronger. When you look back on your life a year from now, you won't remember every productive day, every task completed, or every routine followed perfectly, but you will remember who you became because you kept showing up. Because you made the quiet decision to stay in the fight. Because you refused to let inconsistency write your story. This journey of rebuilding yourself, of choosing discipline over comfort, of training your soul to stay committed even when it's hard, is not about a single transformation. It's about thousands of silent decisions. Every early morning, every small choice to do the work, every moment you chose not to quit. You won't feel proud of the ease. You'll feel proud of the struggle you moved through without applause, of the days you got up anyway, of the moments you trained your mind to obey your purpose, not your pain. Because that's the man who rises, not the one who starts when it's easy, but the one who finishes when it's not. So destroy the old you, not out of hatred, but out of love for who you can become. Burn the excuses. Walk alone if you must. Cut the noise, set your standards, and then keep showing up, quietly, relentlessly, stoically. You are the architect now. No one is coming to do it for you. But if you build, brick by brick, day by day, with discipline as your foundation and consistency as your creed, you'll create something unshakable. Not a perfect life, but a powerful one, and that is more than enough. If this episode gave you something to think about, share it, leave a comment, and subscribe for more Stoic reflections like this. This is your space to grow stronger, to think clearer, and to build the life no one thought you could. Until next time, stay grounded, stay disciplined, and never stop showing up.